Austria wouldn't be what it is today without the large involvement of the US government.
The Austro-American relationship was not a one-sided deal.
He said, I've had the most fortunate, wonderful career. America is a fabulous country.
The structure and the core of our bilateral relations is a very strong one.
Although official diplomatic relations between the United States and Austria began in 1838, the relationship between the two countries had started decades earlier with the Austrian Empire's interest in exploring opportunities for trade and commerce in the New World. As history shows, the relationship did not always progress harmoniously. More importantly, however, it did evolve to overcome obstacles of historic impact. Now, 175 years later, the two countries are closely bonded in their pursuit of common goals for a secure and just world. In 1820, an Austrian consulate general was established in New York under the direction of Alois Louis Baron von Lederer. In 1825, Secretary of State Henry Clay announced that the United States was ready to conclude a commerce and navigation convention with the Austrian Empire. In 1828, Emperor Francis I instructed Baron von Lederer to negotiate a treaty, leading to formal discussions on trade. The Treaty of Commerce and Navigation between the United States and Austria was signed in Washington, D.C. on August 27, 1829. Official diplomatic relations, however, were established with the appointment of Henry A. Muhlenberg as the first American minister to Vienna on February 8, 1838. The Austrian Empire's first minister to the United States, Wenzel Philipp Baron de Marschall, established an Austrian legation in Washington, presenting his credentials on October 13, 1838. By 1850, Austria had established a system of 11 vice-consulates along the Gulf and Atlantic coasts, focusing mainly on trade in tobacco and cotton. Over time, and despite 2 world wars, the US and Austria built and rebuilt trade relations that prosper today. The US is Austria's 3rd largest investor. For US companies, Austria represents an attractive and affluent export market. For the US and Austria, trade and investment is a dynamic, continuously expanding two-way street.
What maybe not too many people know, that Austrians were among the first settlers in the United States. That dates back to the early 18th century.
In 1734, 50 families of exiled Lutherans from Salzburg undertook a 2-month trip to cross the Atlantic and establish a community in Ebenezer, Georgia. These Salzburgers and their descendants have played an important role in the history of the state of Georgia and the US. They were among the first settlers in America to oppose slavery, and they distinguished themselves through their service and contributions to the economic, social, religious, and political life in America. Immigration from Austro-Hungary continued through the 19th century, peaking during the first decade of the 20th century. With the onset of the First World War, Austrian immigration practically came to a standstill. During the post-war period of 1919 to 1924, fewer than 20,000 Austrians immigrated to the United States, and of those, an estimated 60% came from Burgenland.
Here's an Austrian girl that immigrated to the United States as a young adult, became a confidant of the president, and then returns to her homeland as US ambassador.
According to the 2000 U.S. Census, 735,000 Americans claim Austrian heritage. Like their ancestors, they continue to enrich the relationship between the United States and Austria. In the years leading up to World War I, the U.S. pursued policies to avoid conflict while trying to broker peace. Despite those efforts, President Woodrow Wilson, citing Germany's violation of its pledge to suspend unrestricted submarine warfare, went before a special session of Congress to deliver his war message. 4 days later, Congress overwhelmingly passed the war resolution. Austria-Hungary then severed diplomatic relations with the U.S. on April 8, 1917. On January 8, 1918, President Wilson presented his historic 14 points to Congress, providing a framework for a post-war world order. The 10th point called for the freest opportunity to autonomous development of the peoples of Austria-Hungary, which contributed to the consequent breakup of the empire. The United States signed the treaty establishing friendly relations and recognized the Republic of Austria on August 24, 1921. During the 1930s, the combination of the Great Depression and the memory of tragic losses in World War I influenced American policy toward non-entanglement in international politics. Between the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany in 1938 and the entry of the U.S. into the war in 1941, 29,000 Austrians emigrated to the United States. Approximately 80% were Jews. In the U.S., they found opportunities to make significant contributions to world culture that benefit society today. In 1940, U.S. policy shifted from neutrality to non-belligerency by providing aid to the nations at war with Germany, Italy, and Japan. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked the U.S. naval installation in Pearl Harbor, thus bringing the United States formally into World War II.
Will live in infamy.
While relations were again severed with Austria, the post-World War II years, however, provided political and economic opportunities that redefined the relationship between the U.S. and Austria. In the long-term interest of avoiding another global war, the U.S. used economic assistance as a strategic element of its foreign policy, offering significant aid to Europe. By June 1947, when the UN Relief and Rehabilitation Administration stopped shipments of food to Austria, the U.S. had spent $300 million in food aid to avert a hunger crisis.
At the time, I'm sure that it really helped a lot of us to not to starve.
On April 3, 1948, President Harry Truman signed the Economic Cooperation Act, authorizing the establishment of the European Recovery Program, the ERP, later known as the Marshall Plan. The Austrian government accepted the offer to join, and on July 2, 1948, a bilateral agreement was signed.
From all the countries that were beneficiaries of the Marshall Plan, we were among those who profited most.
I was a young girl in Austria in the 1950s and early 60s, and the American library in those years was an open door to the world.
In tandem with the ERP, Amerikahäuser represented Marshall Plan of the Mind, were established across Austria, serving as libraries, concert halls, and movie theaters to build and strengthen cultural ties and shared values between Austrians and Americans.
We didn't want to pretend to be anything other than what we were. We played the Star-Spangled Banner at midnight every night, and we added to it as a motto, a station for Austria. And we meant that specifically and metaphorically, we were for Austria.
On March 29, 1961, Austrian Chancellor Julius Raab and U.S. Ambassador H. Freeman Matthews signed the ERP Counterpart Settlement Agreement, which turned control of the ERP funds over to the Austrian government.
Last year, still 480 million euros generated out of these funds. It's basically the way it was set up, with very much foresight.
I was very proud when on the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the Marshall Fund that the Ministry of Economics and Labor decided to donate 20 million euro to promote the academic exchanges between the United States and Austria.
As part of post-World War II reconstruction, the Fulbright Act of 1946 provided economic assistance for education and research and laid the foundations for the United States' flagship academic exchange program. This U.S. academic exchange program was conceptualized by Senator J. William Fulbright to increase mutual understanding between the people of the United States and the people of other countries.
For many years, it was the only opportunity that young Austrian scholars and students had to study outside of Austria.
Since 1951, more than 2,300 American and 3,500 Austrian grantees have participated in the Fulbright program, which from 1963 has been co-funded by Austria. IES Abroad, the largest facilitator of study abroad programs for U.S. students, was founded at the Institute of European Studies in Vienna in 1950. Every year, about 1,000 Austrians study at universities in the U.S., and some 2,700 Americans study in Austria through programs developed by Austrian and American educational institutions. Over the past 60 years, more than 1,000 Austrians have been invited to participate in the International Visitor Leadership Program, the IVLP, the U.S. Department of State's premier professional exchange program. Through short-term visits to the United States, current and emerging leaders from a variety of specialized fields experience American culture and society firsthand and cultivate lasting relationships with their American counterparts.
Sovereignty for Austria, concluded within Vienna's ancient Belvedere Palace, marked the end of 17 years of German and Big Four occupation.
On May 15, 1955, the U.S. was a signatory to the Austrian State Treaty, which ended the occupation and declared Austria to be a free, independent, and neutral state. Because of Austria's neutrality, Vienna has frequently been chosen as the venue of key superpower summit meetings and the official location for multilateral and international organizations.
This gift to the people of America, symbolic of the great friendship between our two peoples.
When I arrived in Washington in '92, the term of office of our federal president, Kurt Waldheim, expired, and we had a new federal president, Thomas Klestil, who was, I think Americans would say, an old American hand. And so there was a relaunch of the bilateral relations after the very difficult years during the term of President Kurt Waldheim.
While respective approaches to regional and international issues may differ at times, the United States and Austria share many common values: support for human rights and the rule of law, commitment to reducing threats posed by climate change and nuclear proliferation, and a shared vision of peace and freedom for all.
We maintain a very robust exchange between the two military academies, both the Therese Military Academy in Wiener Neustadt and, of course, the United States Military Academy at West Point. In those opportunities where our students are working together, we build relationships which hopefully in the future those friends, as they reach higher ranks, can get together and do things together.
Austria and the United States, partners in promoting global security and prosperity, cooperate in addressing issues of global concern such as counterterrorism, combating illegal drug trade and organized crime, and trafficking in persons.
So we had women from 39 countries, 320 of them, and the First Lady, Hillary Clinton, came over, as did Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, and all kinds of women leaders from Eastern and Western Europe, talking to the group about women's role in law and in business and in foreign policy as well, and in the economy. So it was a terrific gathering.
The two countries are bound together through family ties and contacts in business, the arts, education and research, sports and recreation.
I started in 1979 at the Austrian Press and Information Service in New York. Our task there was to, well, somehow correct the image Austria enjoyed in the United States. And that image looked like this. Austria, or better Australia, because we were always confused with the entity down under, Australia is a communist country inhabited by Nazis, whose emperor rides on a white stallion called the Lipizan in his capital Salzburg, and whistles the national anthem, which actually was a tune out of The Sound of Music.
I wish Austria and the United States another 175 years of good relations